Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Soul Stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Stay with us, because a new love story is about to begin. Chelsea Goodwin had learned to read storms before she could read books. Her father taught her that skill on the small homestead where she was born, showing her how to watch the way horses flicked their ears and how cattle bunched together near the creek when pressure dropped in the air. By the time she was 12, she could predict rain 3 days out better than any almanac. By the time she was 16, she was married to a man who never once asked her opinion about weather or anything else. Kel Goodwin came from money, which in Redemption Valley meant his family owned the bank and 300 head of cattle and a house with glass windows instead of oiled paper. Chelsea's father owed that bank money after 2 bad winters killed half his herd, and when Kel Goodwin the younger showed interest in the quiet girl with sun-browned skin and calloused hands, nobody asked Chelsea what she thought about the arrangement. Her father signed papers. Her mother sewed a dress from flour sacks bleached white. Chelsea walked down a church aisle toward a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. The cruelty started small. Kel would comment on her accent, the way she dropped letters from words, the way country people did. He would push away meals she prepared, saying his mother's cook made better biscuits, better gravy, better everything. He would laugh when she tried to discuss ranch business, telling her that pretty heads shouldn't worry about ugly numbers. Chelsea stopped talking about weather patterns. She stopped talking about cattle. Eventually she stopped talking much at all, and Kel seemed satisfied with her silence. When the fire took him 7 years later, Chelsea stood in the ashes of the stable where he died and felt nothing but a hollow kind of relief. The townspeople brought casseroles and condolences. They whispered about the tragic young widow. They never knew that Chelsea had spent 7 years learning to breathe shallowly so Kel wouldn't hear her and find something new to criticize. They never knew she slept with one ear, always listening for his footsteps. They never knew that the night of the fire, she had been awake in the kitchen, staring at the wall, wondering if she would spend the rest of her life feeling like a guest in her own home. She inherited the Double M Ranch along with its debts. The banker who had been K.L.'s father offered to buy her out, his voice dripping with false concern about a woman trying to run cattle alone. Chelsea looked at him with the same flat expression she had perfected during her marriage and said she would manage just fine. Then she went home and taught herself everything Kel had never let her learn. The ledgers became her new language. She studied cattle weights and market fell, fluctuations and feed costs, until numbers made more sense than people ever had. She learned to negotiate with buyers who expected her to fold at the first lowball offer. She hired hands who were willing to take orders from a woman and fired the ones who weren't. She worked from before dawn until after dark, and slowly, impossibly, the Double M began to turn a profit. Dalton Hancock arrived during H.E.R. third spring alone. He came with references from a ranch 2 counties over, and a quiet way of standing that reminded Chelsea of draft horses. All that strength held in patient stillness. She hired him for fence work initially, but he proved useful in a dozen other ways. He could gentle spooked animals. He could fix machinery that other men declared hopeless. He could cook meals that made the B.U. house smell like someone's grandmother lived there. Chelsea noticed these things the way she noticed weather patterns, observing from a careful distance. She had built walls around herself so high and thick that sometimes she forgot what the landscape looked like beyond them. Dalton was just another hired hand, she told herself. His kindness was simply professional courtesy. The way he tipped his hat to her each morning meant nothing personal, but she found herself watching him more than she watched the other hands. She noticed how he spoke to animals in a low, steady voice, never raising it, never forcing. She noticed how he stepped back when he saw her coming, giving her space instead of crowding her the way some men did. She noticed how he never commented on her clothes or her cooking, or the way she ran her ranch. He simply did his work and let her do hers. The day of the flash flood changed everything, though neither of them recognized it at the time. Chelsea was checking fence lines in the south pasture when the storm rolled in faster than she expected. Rain came down in sheets so thick she could barely see her own hands. The creek that ran through the property swelled in. Minutes, and somewhere in that chaos, a steer got swept into a drainage chute where the water ran fast and deep. Chelsea heard it bellowing over the roar of the rain. She dismounted and waded through mud that sucked at her boots, reaching the chute just as the panicked animal struggled against the current. Without thinking, she grabbed a rope from her saddle and looped it around the steer's horns. The water pulled. Chelsea pulled back. Her boots sank into the muck. Her arms screamed with strain. The steer weighed close to 800 pounds, and the water added another 100 to that weight. She held on anyway. Dalton appeared beside her like a ghost made solid. He did not ask questions. He did not tell her to step aside. He simply grabbed the rope behind her hands and added his strength to hers. Together, they hauled the steer inch by inch out of that chute while the rain tried to drown them both. When the animal finally scrambled onto solid ground and stood shaking but alive, Chelsea collapsed against a fence post, gasping for breath. Her arms trembled. Her legs felt like water. She had never worked so hard for anything in her life, not even keeping the ranch afloat those desperate months alone. Dalton looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. He said her hands were stronger than he knew, and the words came out rough and surprised, as if he hadn't meant to say them at all. Chelsea did not know how to respond. Kel had never once complimented her strength. Kel had wanted her weak and pliable and silent. So she deflected, told Dalton to grab the steer's head because she couldn't hold on forever. And they finished the job like the practical ranchers they were. But something had cracked open between them. Chelsea felt it like a change in atmospheric pressure, that same instinct her father had taught her for reading storms. Something was coming. She just didn't know yet whether it would bring rain or destruction. The weeks that followed felt like a slow awakening. Chelsea found herself lingering near the barn when Dalton worked there. She started asking his opinions about cattle rotations and grazing schedules, and his answers revealed a depth of knowledge she hadn't expected from a man the town would dismiss as just a hired hand. He listened when she talked about market prices and weather predictions. He remembered details she mentio. Ned once and never repeated. He treated her thoughts like they mattered. She did not know what to do with kindness anymore. Kel had trained her to expect criticism wrapped in softness, compliments that turned into weapons. Every time Dalton said something gentle, Chelsea waited for the sting that would follow. It never came. He just kept being himself, patient and steady and good, and eventually, Chelsea stopped waiting for cruelty that was not going to arrive. The first time he touched her on purpose was an accident, if such things can be accidents. Chelsea was stacking feed sacks that were too heavy for her to lift alone, and when she stumbled, Dalton caught her. His hands on her waist were firm but careful, holding her steady without trapping her. She could have stepped away easily. He gave her that choice, and something about that choice made her want to stay. She pulled back eventually, embarrassed by her own weakness. Dalton did not tease her. He did not use the moment to push for more. He simply observed that even strong people needed help sometimes, and the words struck Chelsea like a revelation. No one had ever told her it was acceptable to lean on someone. She had spent so many years being crushed under someone else's weight that she forgot leaning could go both directions. The town started talking, because small towns always talked. Chelsea heard the whispers at the general store, the speculation about whether the widow was getting too familiar with her ranch hand, She ignored the gossip the way she had learned to ignore so many things during her marriage. Our people's opinions had stopped mattering to her years ago. She was done performing respectability for an audience that had never once asked what she actually wanted. But Dalton worried. He came to her one evening with trouble in his eyes, suggesting that maybe he should keep more distance, that he did not want to damage her reputation. Chelsea felt something fierce rise up in her chest, something that had been dormant for so long, she barely recognized it. She told him flatly that her reputation was her own concern, and that she was tired of letting other people decide who she could stand beside. Dalton stared at her for a long moment. Then he asked quietly if she was saying what he thought she was saying. Chelsea did not know how to answer. She only knew that this man had never hurt her, never diminished her, never made her feel like a guest in her own life. He had simply been present, been kind, been good, and she wanted more of that goodness in whatever form it chose to take. They moved toward each other, gradually, like two wild things learning to trust. Chelsea taught herself how to accept compliments without waiting for the cut that followed. Dalton learned which subjects made her go quiet and which ones lit something bright in her eyes. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing the kind of mundane intimacies that build a life together. He showed her how to see oak meals the ranch hands actually enjoyed. She showed him how to read approaching storms and the way horses flick their ears. When they finally kissed, it happened during a thunderstorm, because of course it did. Dalton had been out checking fence lines when the weather turned violent, and Chelsea spent 2 hours pacing her kitchen, watching the windows, feeling fear that had nothing to do with lightning. When he finally walked through her door, soaked and wind-blown but alive, she crossed the room without thinking and reached for him. The kiss was slow and careful. Two people who had learned caution in different ways, discovering what it meant to be gentle with each other. Dalton held her like she was precious rather than fragile. Chelsea let herself be held for the first time in more hours than she wanted to count. And when they finally drew apart, both breathless, Dalton whispered that he wanted this to be permanent, not a temporary comfort, not something that would end when the gossip got too loud. Real and lasting and chosen. Chelsea said yes. They married under the cottonwood tree by the creek, the same creek that had nearly drowned a steer and given Chelsea the first glimpse of what partnership could look like. The ceremony was simple. The vows were sincere. The town talked, because towns always talk. But Chelsea and Dalton stopped listening. They had found something more valuable than approval. They had found each other. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranching never is. There were droughts and market crashes and calves that died despite their best efforts. But there was also laughter in a kitchen that had once been silent. There were children who grew up watching their parents work side by side as equals. There was a marriage built on respect rather than ownership, on kindness rather than control. Chelsea never forgot the lessons she learned during those 7 years with Kel. The scars he left on her heart did not disappear just because Dalton loved her. But she learned to distinguish between memory and reality, between what had been and what was. She learned that some damage could be healed by someone patient enough to wait while the healing happened. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set gold over Redemption Valley and the ranch stood solid around them, Chelsea sometimes thought about the girl who had walked down a church aisle toward a man whose smile never reached his eyes. That girl had survived things that should have broken her. She had learned to read storms and balance ledgers, and pull drowning cattle from flash floods with nothing but T-rope and stubbornness. She had built a life from the ashes of a marriage that tried to destroy her. But the woman Chelsea became, the one who laughed freely and loved openly and stood beside a man who considered her his equal, that woman had done something even harder. She had learned to trust again. She had opened a gate she swore would stay closed forever. And she had discovered that the strongest hands were not always the ones that gripped the tightest. Sometimes they were the ones that knew when to let go and when to hold on, and how to tell the difference between the two.